Butte-Silver Bow. Direct our thoughts, words, and deeds so that we please you and best serve our fellow citizens. Amen. Pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Commissioner Sorich. Next item is the report of the chair. The first item I would like to mention is that, as most of you know, Chairman Frederickson lost his mother over the weekend, and that's why he's not here tonight. And so I would just like you all to keep him in your thoughts and prayers and send good vibrations to he and his family. The next thing I'd like to bring up is we just received a notification. I did print out some flyers. They're on the table right by the door, so anybody that's interested in that, please grab a flyer so you can mark that on your calendars and plan to attend. Right. I do the report of the chair first. Yeah. Next, we will move to public comment on any items on the agenda. If you would like to speak on something on the agenda, please come forward, state your name and address for the record. List the agenda item that you're speaking on. I won't be limiting public comment to 3 minutes. However, I would like to remind everybody to be respectful of everybody in this room's time. Keep comments germane to the conversation and the agenda item that you're speaking on, and remain civil. Are there any public comments?
Madam Chair, members of the council, my name is Evan Barrett. I live at 807 West Silver on the Butte Hill. I want to especially say how pleased I am to see Commissioner Anderson here with us. I want to briefly address our major agenda item today, which is the Natural Resource Damage Program presentation that we did not get a couple weeks ago because of the weather. And as I said that night, and I'd like to repeat that Butte has no better friend when it comes to cleaning up the Butte Hill than the Natural Resource Damage Program. And the evidence of that in how they took what ended up to be the most dirtiest spot on the hill, the most contaminated spot on the hill, with the Barrett tailings, and turned it into something really terrific and really did a great job of cleaning that up. It is worth remembering that ARCO and EPA, and incidentally also 20 years ago, Butte-Silver Bow, thought that the Barrett tailings did not deserve to be cleaned up. Turned out it was the worst place on the hill. It's good to remember history. NRD did it and did it right. And it's worth noting how they did it right, and that, I hope, is going to be the subject of their conversation. I have something I want to give to you. I told you at the time 2 weeks ago that I was going to give this to you, present it to you, but attached here in this document is a document that details the superb process that the NRDP did in cleaning up the Barrett tailings. The process they followed is a model for good cleanup of the Silver Bow Creek corridor. Butte-Silver Bow is in the position where it can call for the EPA and BP ARCO to utilize the NRDP process in the diggings east, Northside Tailings and Buffalo Gulch. You can't force them to do it, but you can call for them to do it and hope that they would listen to the needs of the public. The EPA's so-called position paper that they've done on this area is not a plan, it's not even a process. It's just a concept with a promise that they will somehow work their way to a good cleanup in their technical meetings. Not a guarantee that they will end up with a satisfactory process. When we look at the process that the NRDP has used, we know that it works. We know that it works very well, and that ought to guide our judgment on what we want to see done in that corridor. The parrot tailings process would produce the kind of cleanup for Butte in the center of town that we really deserve. So I urge Butte-Silver to become an advocate for the use of the parrot protocols, as I call them, which are proven to have worked and properly cleared up the horrible mess in the parrot tailings. Again, a project that EPA and BP ARCO felt did not have to be done. Turned out that it really did have to be done, and we ought to be glad that it was. Though Butte-Silver is a signatory to the BIPSU CD, you are not muzzled by that process. The days of stuff happening behind the curtain and the days of saying you can't say what you think are gone. You are not muzzled by the process. You are free to advocate for something better for Butte. You can't force a change in the CD. I don't think it ought to be reopened. But I think that BP, ARCO, and the EPA ought to do what's right for Butte, not what's right for the oil company that made $28 billion last year but doesn't want to spend a few more bucks here. So you are free to advocate for something better, and I believe the NRDP parrot tailings cleanup process is better for Butte. Tonight I hope you take a look at this that I hand out, listen to the NRDP's presentation tonight, become an advocate for a better for Butte process for the Silver Bow Creek corridor. And you're going to have your chance tonight with some real experts here that did it right, and are willing to answer your questions. And I hope you ask them plenty of questions so we get a lot on the table and a lot on the record. Thank you very much. I'll hand this out if it's okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. Thanks, Caitlin. Are there any other people who would like to present public comment on any item on the agenda? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on. Section 1, bid openings, public hearings, and/or presentations. Item number 1, communication number 2023-548, Jim Fisher, Commissioner District 6, requesting BSB Community Development Director Karen Burns and/or Chief Executive J.P. Gallagher to present to BSB Council on November 8th, 2023, with an update on the courthouse restroom project. Director Burns.
So I think I'll start. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Chief Executive Gallagher, please.
Thank you, Chairman Shea. So tonight we have a little bit of a schedule that we can put in front of you. So as you can see on the project schedule, bid documents will be received by Langless from SMA on November 15th. So a week from today that they will receive the documents. Then bids will go back out at the time, and then they'll be received back in on December 12th, delivered to the clerk and recorder, and then opened up here after they're received at 2 o'clock. We're going to do an update to you. We communicated that we were having an update on the 15th. We weren't quite sure on what we were going to have here, but since there was requested to have a presentation today, we have that going forward. Langless has published the bid info in the papers on the Builders Exchange. It'll be uploaded on the 17th. New newspaper published dates will be November 18th, the 25th, December 2nd, and the 7th. The guaranteed maximum price amendment to the Council of Commissioners will be received December 20th, and agenda items by 2 o'clock on December 15th. And then construction is supposed to start in January of 2024. So of that, some of the information that I think has been asked is how have there been bids put out there to individual contractors? There hasn't. There's been estimated price so that they could get to where they would be able to get the bid documents to get that guaranteed maximum price. I would allow Director Burns to come up and explain more if he wants more explanation of that, but really the process starts for us next week, and so that's when we'll be going forward. Commissioner Fisher, is there any other questions that you might have for us?
Go ahead, Commissioner Fisher.
Excuse me. Thank you, Chairman Shaw. I guess I just want to review a little bit. We put $500,000 into the budget in the 2021-22 budget. We're now moving into 2024. We haven't seen nothing move yet. So when we go back, the contract thing, the GMCA thing was supposed to expedite the process and make it less expensive. It's done neither. It's made it more complex. It's made it a little bit more discussion about what's going on. I don't know how you go out to a contractor and tell them to give you an estimate of what it's going to cost and then expect them to bid on it in a month. I mean, which has happened. We know that happened. But I guess that's part of the process. But I guess the thing that goes back to me, and I'm just going to take the floor for a minute if I could, Chairman. Thank you. So what I'm saying is we had $500,000 in the budget to redo the restrooms. We've yet to have hot water running on the third floor. It's a disgrace. These people out here come to Butte-Silver in our courthouse. If they're going to go use the restroom right now, it's a shame for us to have this. If this was a public building, the health department would shut them down. And I'm getting close to having them inspect this and do it. So the other thing is, why in the world, when we go back, and I approved all this, so I'm going a little hindsight, why would we hire a firm from Helena to work on the Butte-Silver courthouse? I mean, Langless is from Helena, or SMA is from Helena, Langless is from Billings, both out-of-town firms, don't pay a nickel in taxes in Butte-Silver, but yet they're running the show. I'm told now that we've already spent $160,000 to $175,000 already on these restrooms, and we've got nothing done. We don't even have hot water running in these restrooms. I don't agree with the process. I don't agree with the procedure. And I mean, 2021-22 budget. I asked for more money to be put in the budget last year, and I was told that there's no sense putting more money in it. We haven't spent what we got yet. This is very frustrating, and this is unacceptable to me. And I don't know how many other commissioners feel like I do, but this is, I don't know where to start and know where to end here, but I'm telling you, I'm totally frustrated. I'm about to the point where I was the guy that kind of led the charge, and everybody agreed to put in the budget. And here we are today, November 8th, going to be January 24, and we're going to finally, January 24, we're going to start a project. Prices have increased enormously. We've gotten nowhere. We flew a drone through the courthouse, I guess. Don't know what that done. We haven't seen nothing about what the drone done. We've seen a few plans on the bathrooms, but we haven't seen nothing. So I guess my question is, where does this thing start and end? I mean, when I was on the council in 2021, 22, and decided to fight for $500,000 to put in the budget, I thought we were going to get something done. We've done nothing. I need some answers. I don't know where to get them. I mean, I keep getting this kind of stuff. I get emails. I get all this stuff. Chief Executive, you just tell me, what's going on? Where are we missing this? Why did we hire an out-of-town firm? Why didn't we get locals involved? I mean, we always talk about local labor and stuff. We've got SMA out of Helena and Langless out of Billings, and we've got contractors in Butte looking for work, but yet they're asking people in Butte right now to give a high estimate to see what the engineer's estimate might be, I guess is what you call it. I don't know if you call it that or not. And then they're going to let these guys go out and bid on these projects. Well, the process and procedure is screwed up. And if you have any answers to my questions, I really don't have no more questions. I'm frustrated, and the people of Butte are frustrated. People go into the treasurer's office to license their car, pay their property taxes this month. They go into property taxes. They stand in line to pay their taxes, and then they got to use the restroom. They go in there. They can't even wash their hands. It's a mess.
Thank you, Commissioner Fisher. Chief Executive Gallagher.
Thank you, Chairman Shaw. Commissioner Fisher, I'm not quite sure if there was a question in there, but I understand that you're frustrated. But the process has followed a timeline that was lined out in here. And I understand that you're frustrated that the work went to an architect out of Helena. But I can tell you this, we have architect out of Helena. We don't have abundance of architects in Butte-Silver. Mr. Hennick has done some work for us locally here, but there was a process that selected SMA as the architect. They came and presented. Then the process of, we put a committee together, which we had representation from the council, and we had representations in Butte-Silver, and we selected the GCCM process based on the historical nature of this building. So the process has been followed. The timelines have been followed the way that they're supposed to. I understand you're frustrated, but we're moving the project forward. I don't know as far as, we believe that the project cost is going to come in lower. That was one of the measuring points to this. So we believe that those costs are going to come in lower. But, to answer the rest of your questions, the process has followed the way it's supposed to go. I understand that you're frustrated with the timeline on it, but I can't change how the schedule's going. We picked the way we were going to go, and we're moving forward with that.
Commissioner Fisher, follow up.
Thank you, Chairman Shea. Thank you, Chief Executive Gallagher. I guess I have a tough time dealing with this because 2021-22 budget, we're already in 23-24 budget season. And the thing is, I was asked to be on that committee. I refused because I knew this stuff was happening. But I did recommend that one of our commissioners, who's a construction worker, be on that committee. And you know what? Frederickson and I were the first two asked to be on that committee. I denied. Frederickson said okay, and he done it. There was never a second commissioner picked. Why wouldn't you pick somebody that's got construction knowledge like Commissioner Fortune? That never was done. Why don't we start using the assets of our community and our commissioners that are willing to help? Instead, we got 5 or 6 people on a committee that know nothing about construction. Right? Am I correct?
Mr.
Chairman
Chief
Shea,
Executive.
Commissioner Fisher, there was thought to not having Commissioner Fortune on there for the fact that we didn't want to limit him to not be able to bid the process, because that would eliminate him from, in his construction company, if they chose to bid, they would not be able to bid on that. So that's why we did not ask Commissioner Fortune. It wasn't to exclude him because of his knowledge. We know that the Fortune Construction is a really good builder for our community, and we understand that, and has great knowledge. But we didn't ask Commissioner Fortune to be on there. I think that, we were asking for you to be on there because this was a project that you were proposing, that you wanted to see happen in there, so we offered that to you. But, the process is the process. We can't change where we're at. We're going to move forward. We're going to continue the process and, and get this project done.
Commissioner Fisher.
Thank you, Chairman Shea. Thank you, Chief Executive. I don't mean to be argumentative or negative about this, but let's face it. It's way taking too long to get where we're at today. Way too long. And this has not, in my mind, showed any money savings. It showed delay in the project. And, when you look at it, there's urgent needs that need to be done here. I mean, we're not talking about rebuilding the first 4 bathrooms, which we haven't started, and that was the project we're going to start with. We've already spent like $175,000 and haven't done nothing. Are we even going to have enough money to finish it? Can we get the health department in here to say we got warm water on the 3rd floor in the restroom? This is where we meet weekly. If you go in there, you can't even turn the handle either way to get the faucet to go on or off. I just left in there. I mean, do we got to call the health department or the state sanitarian to come in here and say, hey, Butte-Silver, you're not in compliance? Is that what we got to do, or are we going to get something done? Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Fisher. Commissioner Fortune.
What do I call you tonight?
Chairman. Commissioner Shea.
Commissioner Shea, Chief Executive. Has Butte-Silver been given a guaranteed maximum price?
Mr. Chief Executive.
I'll defer this to Director Burns.
Director Burns, please.
Thank you, Chairman Shea, and members of council, Commissioner Fortune. The guaranteed maximum price will not be revealed to us. We won't have that until December 20th. The bids have to go out first. So what we have is a fine-tuned estimate and scope of work that we've worked on over the summer with our team. We've gone out for 3 rounds of pricing, and I believe that's where a lot of the confusion came from. There has been pricing that's been done in the community, which is part of the process, and that gives us an estimation of where we've got our budget set, and we believe we're going to come in under budget of what we had projected, and that informs the final bid document, bid set, that is referenced in the schedule, and that bid set is then put out for public procurement. And after that public procurement, we come back with our guaranteed maximum price. That is how it works according to state statute.
Thank you, Director Burns. Commissioner Fortune, follow up.
Yeah, Commissioner Shea. So we weren't told that there was going to be 3 rounds of pricing. We were told that everybody was going to get a chance to bid this the last time we had this discussion. I mean, is it right? And how can, I already brought this to everybody's attention, that how can we, again, if we're doing these 3 rounds of pricing, send private people asking for pricing, and then them guys having all the plans, and now we're going to put it out to bid after several subcontractors have seen the pricing and had all summer to look at the plans.
Director Burns.
Thank you, Chairman Shea and members of council, Commissioner Fortune. That's exactly how it works. That is the process of the design build construction management process. And the bid process, everyone who had anything to do with the pricing and with us fine-tuning this are welcome to bid the project when it goes public on November 17th on the Builders Exchange. They can submit those bids back.
Commissioner Fortune.
And all the people allowed to bid it are going to compete with the people who've had all summer to put their pricing together fairly?
It's a
Director
public
Burns.
procured process. I'm sorry, I didn't address you properly. Excuse me. Chairman Shea and members of council, yes, that is the process. And I really think it would be useful for the body and for myself and for all of us to have, unfortunately, we're after the fact. We've gone down this GCCM process a few times with our council on some major projects. And this is the same process was followed on those other projects as well. Those other projects were the parking garage and the clubhouse at the golf course. They went through this exact same process. Nothing is different about this time than was those times in the past. The same process was followed. And so we are not doing anything different at this time. So that it is what the process is. A presentation was just given at the Montana League of Cities and Towns. And it was discussed there. Those in the audience, myself and representatives from Bozeman who had done this process before were able to talk with others in other small cities about how this works. The state of Montana almost exclusively uses this process now for most of their projects. And I know you're shaking your head at me, but they were in the room and they represented that. And so I'm not trying to, I'm just saying that this is a process that's well accepted for certain kinds of projects, and construction and renovation is definitely one of those processes that it's used for. And so I just wanted to give you that information. I'm happy to back that up if anybody would like to see that. But we are following this process. This will be publicly bid, as I stated multiple times. I've let you know that it will be noticed on November 17th. Bids will be advertised in the Montana Standard, and they will be accepted back to this community on December 12th at 2 o'clock, by 2 o'clock in the clerk and recorder's office, and opened immediately thereafter in this room. And that will all be publicly noticed.
Thank you, Director Burns. Follow up, Commissioner Fortune.
I have a couple more questions, Commissioner Shea, but I've done lots of GCCMs. I guess I'm just addressing the council, and you don't ask 4 or 5 subcontractors to give you pricing, and then once you have your pricing, then decide you're going to put it out to bid to the public. That no way, shape, or form is that fair bidding to the public. If somebody called me and I gave them a budget, and then 2 months later they said, well, now we're going to let everybody bid it, so just bid it, or you can use your budgets from before. That's just not right, and that's not how this process should work. And we were told up here that everybody would get a chance to bid it, and I've seen, and I've presented everybody that the person selected has not fairly advertised this to the public. And we can talk about phases of bidding. We were never told there would be first phase, second phase, third phase. We were told that we were going to select a GCCM. They were going to help with the bid documents together and the drawings, not even the bid documents, and that we would be moving forward. We weren't told that we'd have a first round, second round, third round, and then after those 3 rounds of getting pricing, then we'd let the public have a chance to take a shot at it. That just doesn't seem fair, and that's not how every GCCM project that I've been involved in has worked, and I've done it for private and the state of Montana. And then I guess my next question, what happens if the guaranteed maximum price doesn't fit our budget? I mean, if we have 500,000 allocated and we've spent 200,000 almost, are they going to meet 300,000 for the first floor, or what happens then?
Director Burns?
Commissioner Shea, members of council, Commissioner Fortune, that's a good question. You know, we've worked hard to make sure that our estimates are inside of our budget. After the bid process, we're hopeful that we did a good job in getting there, and that it will be within our budget. If it's outside of our budget, we'll have to figure out what we're going to do next. Because we've started down this process, and there's no guarantee that we have to accept a guaranteed maximum price, that's this body's decision. If we get to that point and it's unacceptable and we don't want to move forward and we want to punt, I guess, or call an audible at that point, we're going to have to do that. But I am very hopeful that we've put enough time and effort into this and worked very hard to get within our budget with these estimates that we're going to have a good project at the end of the day. And so that's what we're working towards.
Thank you, Director Burns. I have just a curiosity question for you. How are the contractors chosen who provide the pricing estimates? I just don't understand the process. I'm trying to understand.
Right. So, excuse me, Commissioner Shea and members of council. So, I'm not sure exactly how those pricing, people that folks reach out to. Our general contractor manager is Langless. They can reach out to anyone who they can find in the phone book, anyone they've had a relationship with, they're trying to get an estimate based on real world numbers that are happening right now, which is changing very fast, as all of us know, in terms of any construction project we have ongoing. So they're really just trying to work with that. They're working with, and we've talked about bid documents, they're working with, documents that these documents are at a 30% design. That's when you get your first round of pricing. Then we work on those, we tweak those. We say, okay, well, some of these things are coming in at higher than we had anticipated. What do we want to tweak in the next round? Then there's a 50% design round that might go back out and receive additional feedback on. Then a 75% round. And so now we're at the point where we have really worked hard to get what we think is going to give us a great project, a beautiful project in our budget. And so it's just, people that are comfortable reaching out to. It's not a public process to give a cost estimate back as part of this beginning phases. And that is exactly what is happening and exactly what has happened. So.
Okay, thank you, Director Burns. Commissioner Fortune.
I'm not sure who can answer this, but Commissioner Shea, but every bid that Butte-Silver does that's not a GCCM, when they hire an architect or an engineer, they have an engineer's estimate. It kind of seems like we're creating a lot of steps on a process that's a lot faster and cheaper when we've hired a architecture firm that probably has historical data and real-time data that could provide us budgets. So that would be my first comment, and I don't know, it's just frustrating, like Commissioner Fisher said. It seems like we've tried so hard to get SMA and Langless this job that now we're in too deep almost.
Commissioner Fisher.
Thank you, Chairman Shea. You know, in closing, I'd just like to say, I do commend Director Burns. You know, when this started, she assisted us, me especially, in getting this thing up and running and getting going. So my frustration isn't just, you know, negativity. I understand the process, and I don't understand as well as I'd like to, but I commend her for what she did, because she done what we asked her to do when we got the money. And what's going on here is actually not her fault. It's the process and procedure and protocol that is at fault here. And I just want to make that comment that as far as Director Burns is, she took the bull by the horns, took the job, and my frustration sounds like a little bit negative, but you know, she done a good job, and I think she's continued to do a good job, and I praise her for that. But on the other side of the coin is, this isn't what they call a presentation. I mean, you can call it whatever you want, but the next group up here show what a presentation is. Just as last week we had a presentation by ARCO liability manager. So I do commend you, Karen, and I thank you for all you do. And hopefully this project will move forward and we'll get some restrooms while I can still use them. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Fisher. Justin Fortune, follow-up.
Can the commissioners see the plans or the budgets, or I guess could we get told who provided all these estimates? I mean, if we've done 3 rounds, we should have the first round budgets, the second round budgets, the third round budgets. I mean, I think if the commissioners have spearheaded all this, we should be able to see where we're at.
Thank you, Commissioner Fortune. I would suppose that those are considered public documents. I would ask the county attorney to provide an opinion if she would like.
I'm going to attempt to answer that question.
Thank you, Director Burns.
Commissioner Shea and members of council. So as far as who has been contacted to provide and look at estimating, we could probably provide that list, and I can bring that back to the commission if they'd like to see that. We did provide that when we built the parking garage back to the commissioners. We let you know who was involved in driving our budget for the project, and so that is something we could bring back to this body. We do have our final set of numbers, and our budget estimates for our base bid is coming in at just under $400,000, I can tell you that. And then I could look back through my records. I don't have those with me right now to tell you where we started when we first did our first rounds, but it was well over 500,000. So closer to 6. So I can get you that information and it can be provided to you. But I think, we're in a public bidding process right now that's going to start very soon. And so we want to make sure that, as Commissioner Fortune said, we want to make sure that we are being as fair with that as we can be, because none of the people that have been contacted for pricing has seen a complete set of the 100% bid documents. Those have not been released to anyone at this point.
Thank you, Director Burns. Commissioner Fortune.
Well, if they're not pertaining to the final bid, there shouldn't be a problem releasing them, should there? I mean, we've hired them to provide us all this information, and the commissioners haven't seen any of it.
Thank you, Commissioner Fortune.
I'll,
Mr. Chief Executive.
yeah, Chairman Shea, Commissioner Fortune, we'll get that information to find out, exactly where we are. Because I don't have an answer for that question that you just asked just now.
Follow up.
Commissioner Shea, Chief Executive, just my last question, but if we just got told that we're gonna be close to 400,000, I mean, are we gearing up to add another 200,000 to the budget? I mean, it kind of seems like we're spinning our wheels here. We've already, we're already over our budget, we can tell.
I'll defer this to Director Burns.
Director Burns.
Thank you. Our construction budget for this is just over $400,000, and that's what is remaining of the funds that were allocated for the original allocations that Commissioner Fisher is talking about. And that is our budget. Our estimated budget for this construction is just over $400,000.
Thank you, Director Burns. Commissioner Thatcher.
Thank you, Chairwoman Shea. Director Gleason, would you mind, I just have a quick question, if that's okay.
Absolutely. Director Gleason.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Thatcher, for the record, Danette Gleason, Finance and Budget Director.
For some reason, I was thinking that we did add money to this next fiscal year's budget. Could you elaborate on that?
To clarify, so in the 21-22 budget, there was $500,000. So then when we hired the architects, and we also did, if you recall, I don't even know what the actual term was used, but we did the graphic fly-through and hired that company to come through. So we were looking at all restrooms and mapping out the future phases of the project, so it wasn't just the first floor phase. And so some of that money that we're referencing, and I'm sorry, I don't have the exact number tonight, but it's close to 150 or 160,000 that's been spent, was on the design of not just the first floor and the evaluation of the first floor restrooms. It was all restrooms in the whole courthouse. And then we stepped into how we would phase into what floor we would start with first, and then estimated costs on first floor, second floor, third floor, and whatnot. So that's kind of where those costs were. And then this past budget cycle in '24, we upped the budget back up to the $500,000 level so that we are whole again to start the project, because some of the additional funding that we had in '22 was spread out across the courthouse and the other floors, so that we can phase this project in over time.
Thank you, Director Gleason. Commissioner Fortune.
Isn't the budget just gonna be for the first floor? Isn't that all that's out to bid right now?
Director Gleason.
Thank you, Chairwoman Shea, and Commissioner Fortune. The budget that we have now is for the project that is at hand, which will be the first floor bathrooms. That's what we're talking about. The scan that was done was to do the whole courthouse, to take a look at, so as we phase to do the improvements throughout the whole courthouse, that the whole scan and the money that was spent for that was to prepare for that, for future phases.
Director Gleason.
Chairman Shaw, just to add on to that, that was, you did it.
It's okay.
Chairman Shea, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Sorry, it's already a long night. We did add, remember when we started the project, we weren't even sure where we were going with it. So that was the initial request by Commissioner Fisher in '22, was to begin that process and to evaluate which floor we even started on, to evaluate all the restrooms, because, I mean, I can't even remember how many restrooms is there, 38 restrooms in the courthouse, and we were even evaluating whether we needed 38 restrooms in the courthouse. And so that was kind of the initial money that was placed in the budget, and then to begin the construction process. So.
Thank you, Director Gleason. Commissioner Fortune.
Commissioner Shea, I think my question is it sounds like we budgeted 400,000 for all the bathrooms. And if we're just bidding, we're already at 400,000 for the first floor bathroom. What am I missing here? I mean, are we gonna be into these bathrooms like 400,000 for each one of them?
Commissioner Fortune, I believe that the ask from Commissioner Fisher at the time was to set aside $500,000. I think that might have been a number that you pulled out of a hat, but a good start, am I correct? And then once we had that analysis where the drone came through and they did that full analysis, it was pretty obvious that that wasn't going to be enough to do all of the bathrooms because of the scope of the project. So I will allow Director Gleason to finish up there.
Madam Chairman, Commissioner Fortune, so that was the intent, was just to begin that process, to make sure that we had some money to start phasing in the renovation of the restrooms. And I think at the time, we identified some money that we had available that was one-time capital money that Commissioner Fisher worked with our office and the chief executive to identify. We didn't have $1 million or $1.5 million to throw at the project right away, or even what number. I have no idea what it's going to look like. But we knew that we needed to get working on the project and get going. We needed to start adding. So the project isn't just like the restrooms. It was to start doing renovation projects to our courthouse that has not had any money spent on it in many, many years. And so whether we start looking at windows or we start looking at, and so that was just the first initial start, was how much money do we have to begin working on our courthouse. And it happened to be Commissioner Fisher started working with us on the restroom project.
Thank you, Director Gleason. Commissioner O'Neill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Gleason, would you be able to give us a synopsis of from monies, because I know we have the rendition thing, the 3D thing. It seems like that's going to be an asset for Butte-Silver Bow for future projects, but from start to finish, like what we have left from what we spent, maybe just a little. It doesn't have to be crazy, just on a one piece of paper later, not tonight, just to make us feel good about. Started at 5, went down to 150, threw it back in, and this is what we got for, what our bang for our buck is currently. Thank you.
Director Gleason.
Yep, Madam Chair, Commissioner O'Neill, we can have that to you by the end of the day tomorrow. We'll have a detail for you of all the costs, where they were spent, what vendors they were spent to, where we're at.
Any other commissioners like to speak about this? Okay. Thank you, Director Gleason, Director Burns, and Mr. Chief Executive. Item number 2, communication number 2023-549. Michelle Shea, Commissioner District 2, requesting time at the November 8th, 2023 Committee of the Whole meeting for the NRDP to make a presentation to the Butte-Silver Bow Council of Commissioners. I made this request to ask the NRDP folks to come and give a little presentation. And what I would like is for Acting Director Doug Martin to maybe come up and introduce his staff and then roll into the presentation, please. Mr. Martin.
Thank you, Chairperson, or Chairwoman Shea and Commissioners. I am Doug Martin. I'm with the Natural Resource Damage Program. I'm currently the acting program manager. We do appreciate the invite and your letter asking us to come here and talk about a number of issues that we do have a short presentation to provide you. Members of the program that are here with us today, Pat Kineen is our project manager here in Butte. We have Catherine Hausrath and Jim Ford who will be presenting and answering your questions, and then we'll also be available for questions at the end. Before they get started, I would like to say that the program is supportive of the consent decree that has been signed for the BPSOU operable unit and the cleanup that's going on there. We also really promote the fact that the Parrot tailings removal project is a key component to our support for the cleanup in the corridor. The Parrot project, as Mr. Barrett talked about, was a key project at the head of the corridor, and we do believe that that's key to the cleanup of the rest of the corridor. With that, I will turn it over to Catherine to talk about the legal issues that have been talked about more recently, and then Jim Ford will talk about the Parrot project. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Ms. House Roth, please.
All right. Thank you, Chair Shea, members of the council. My name is Catherine. Sorry. My name is Catherine Houserath, and I'm an attorney with the Montana Natural Resource Damage Program. And I will be speaking tonight to this portion of Commissioner Shea's request. So specifically, we will be talking about, or I will be talking about the state's legal interpretation of the consent decree requirements related to dirty dirt or on-site fill, or we prefer to refer to it as the higher contamination backfill. So there's three components to answer your question of the legal issue. The first one is the contaminant levels in backfill versus waste in the consent decree. And the second part of it is the process in the consent decree under paragraph 27 to modify the consent decree. And then the third part of answering your question is discussing the location restrictions for the backfill, both in the consent decree as well as what's in EPA's recent position paper. So what is the legal issue? At its most basic, the question that we've been asked to speak to is, and the difference between the two interpretations is the state, and this was a position that was developed by both NRDP and DEQ legal counsel. The state believes that all backfill that's used in Butte Priority Soils Operable Unit, no matter what the source is, whether it's dug up on site or hauled in from off-site, has to meet all of the requirements in what's called Table 2 backfill material suitability criteria. And you have a hard copy of that in front of you, which is probably easier to look at. There's a lot in there. The part we're talking about specifically is called Criteria B, General Fill. And I understand this is a very wonky technical issue, and I'll try my best to make it less complicated, but if you get a little bit lost, we all get a little bit lost. So, and then, so the state believes all of the criteria, including the metals that you see in there, the standards, have to be met for backfill. The EPA's current position is that as long as the material that's dug up on site is not waste, it can be used as backfill. And so really what you see, you look at those numbers and you say, oh, the numbers are the same. So what's really the difference here? Because it looks like the numbers are the same in the backfill table and the waste table. The big difference is that highlighted language there. Waste, it means any 3 contaminants exceeding the criteria or any single contaminant over 5,000. So really the big difference is 2 of those numbers on the right side could be up to 5,000. Any of those contaminants could be up to 5,000 and still be used as backfill under the current EPA position. The state's position is that all of those metals need to be met on the left there. So that's really the sort of the nuts and bolts. And before I get into the language that leads to some of this potential ambiguity, I want to take a step back and talk about our belief on how the consent decree should be interpreted if there is any ambiguity in it. Most importantly, as Doug mentioned, we do support the CD. We think that the Butte Priority Soils Operable Unit CD that we all signed is good, and it should be implemented as written. We believe that the corridor remedy that's outlined in there, when combined with the Parrot project that Jim's going to talk about in a little bit, is a protective remedy. So we in no way want to renegotiate the consent decree. And I'll just say it again, we don't want to renegotiate the consent decree. Related to that, when the court entered the consent decree in 2020, the judge had to find that the CD comports with the purposes of CERCLA. So with those two pieces, we believe that any ambiguity should be resolved consistent with CERCLA. So if there is any confusion, it should be resolved in a way that results in implementation of a protective remedy. Because as you all know, I mean, you probably know more about Superfund than any local government in the country, so I don't need to probably get into a lot of detail on it, but a remedy, in order for a remedy to be selected in our Superfund, we have what's called a threshold criteria, which means it has to be met. And one of those threshold criteria is protection of human health and the environment. So that's sort of the guiding light of CERCLA. And related to that, though, you can't require basically an arbitrary requirement. So those numbers that I was showing you earlier in Table 2 for the metals has to be tethered to that protectiveness determination. So if you require certain levels of metals for backfill hauled in from off-site for protection, whether it's to allow vegetation to grow or to keep contamination from leaching to groundwater, there's no good reason to not require that in a different source of backfill. Backfill is backfill. And I guess just to be sure we're all talking about the same thing, when I say backfill, I mean when you have a hole that you've dug up to accomplish the remedy, what do you put back in that hole, essentially? So if you need to meet certain criteria for backfill that's hauled in from offsite, it's our position that it needs to be met for all sources of backfill. So then, now that we've kind of gotten into that, this italicized language, this sentence essentially is what has led to the difference of opinion between EPA and the state. That language, if on-site materials do not exceed the waste identification criteria in Table 1, so remember all those numbers in the smaller table, the material may be used on-site as general fill, provided it meets all other requirements for general fill in Table 2, for example, texture and pH. So our position is that the use of, for example, texture and pH means that everything up there needs to be met for backfill. Of course, we had a difference of opinion. We then went on to say, though, there may be protective uses of this, so-called on-site fill, or we call it higher contamination backfill. But it's important to follow the process outlined in the consent decree to document any modification. We believed it was a modification. We support the CD as entered, and it has a good process for ensuring that any changes are consistent with the original, or consistent with the protectiveness of the original remedy. And I won't read out all of it, and actually this is only one part of the process in the paragraph 27, but the important language is the bolded language there, that such modification is consistent with the scope of the remedy set forth in paragraph 1.3 of the SAL. And that requires an evaluation that any change, even minor, is also protective, because that's essentially the whole point of CERCLA, is making sure you get a protective remedy for your community. So this is the second part of the legal issue. Again, EPA did not agree. It was a modification requiring this process, and sort of moved on with the position paper. So then the third part that we wanted to touch on briefly to answer your question is the most recent position paper proposes to use this fill in locations other than what's allowed for in the CD for general fill. And I've quoted it up there. I won't read the whole footnote. If you want to look at it on your own table, there's you can see there's different columns for different types of backfill depending on where it's going to be used, and then each footnote says where it can be used. And so this is footnote 2 that applies to criteria B. Because remember that ambiguous language was only referring to the criteria B general fill. And so this material under the consent decree can only be used under the Diggings East, Buffalo Gulch, Grove Gulch, and Northside Tailings basins. Now, we don't necessarily disagree that it shouldn't probably go under the basins. If you're going to use higher contamination fill, probably somewhere where water might leak and leach into it is not a good spot. But again, we believe that in order to maintain true to the CD that we all entered, the process should be followed, where you evaluate, well, where are we going to put it? If we don't put it where it says in the CD, there may be a protected place to put it, but it should be evaluated and make sure that what you're doing is protective. So we again said that that paragraph 27 protectiveness analysis should be followed. So where are we now? We believe that Butte deserves implementation of the remedy. It's high time. So we agreed to disagree. We didn't want to slow things up to have a argument on whether or not they were really giving us a paragraph 27. But we do think it's important for the community to get a written determination of whether or not what EPA is proposing to do with this higher contamination backfill is protective. So we've focused our comments that we provided on September 8th to EPA on the protectiveness of where they're proposing to put it. We believe that it's important to follow the process in the CD for that paragraph refers to minor modifications. And in order to make sure that at the end of the day, Butte gets the remedy that we all agreed to, we want any changes documented and evaluated for protectiveness, because it's important. So it isn't just this one issue. This is sort of setting the stage for the process that will be followed for any future changes to the CD as well, because it's likely that there might be other requested changes by EPA or AR. And so we would like to see this process followed for this change as well as future changes, just to make sure that we all understand what's happening and can show at the end that the remedy was implemented as agreed to and protectively. And then finally, one of our comments that we focused on pretty significantly was a concern with some of the locations. One of the restrictions is that for this higher contamination backfill that EPA has proposed is it can be placed anywhere where there will be a groundwater control. The concern with that is that generally under Superfund, you're not supposed to take a contaminated material and put it in the ground where you know it will leach, which is what's being implied by requiring it to be somewhere where there will be groundwater control, where it will leach contamination to the groundwater and then just say, oh, well, as long as there's a groundwater control, that's fine. That's not a typical part of the Superfund process, and it also extends how long you have to have groundwater control, because you're adding contamination back to the groundwater. So our comments delve in more detail to a lot of these issues, asked some questions, and for information, we provided them on September 8th, and they are on our website. One thing we're starting to roll out is trying to make sure that what we provide to EPA is more broadly available to the community, and so we are going to start putting comment letters on our website. Right now we only have this and our Grove Gulch comments, but we will be working on putting major letters up there so that everybody can see and transparently. So thank you. With that, I'll turn it over to Jim Ford. I'll be available for questions as long as you want at the end, and he's going to talk about the paraphernalia.
Welcome, Mr. Ford.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Commissioners, I'm Jim Ford. I work for the NRD program. I'm one of the technical people, I guess, and I've been for the last 5 years the project manager for the removal of the paratailings. So what I'm going to do tonight is just try to answer a few of the other questions that were asked in Chairwoman Shea's letter about the paratailings and how we ran that project. Now, again, this was a sort of a group effort. I mean, I was the project manager for it, but we had a construction management firm, a local firm, Water Environmental Technologies. We had a subcontracted firm, Morrison Merrily, out of Helena, helping with some of the contracting issues. And then, of course, we had contractors actually perform the work. So it was really a group effort. We also, as many of you know, had considerable coordination, not only with Butte-Silver, but with Montana Resources, who really made this project go forward. So first, I just want to give you a heads up. I don't have too many pictures, and unfortunately, Catherine, I've got some numbers, but I'll try to keep it at a high level. But here's a picture of the phase one. So this is north of Civic Center Drive. And I think what this shows, and you're going to see it again here in a couple slides, is, you know, this was an industrial facility. This was a smelter site. So unlike like the Clark Fork River or Silverbow Creek, where wastes were flushed down a stream or a river corridor and were naturally distributed. This was an industrial site. So these materials were placed and manipulated, and you can see that in this figure. I don't know what the size of that excavator is, but they were pretty big excavators we had there in phase one. But you can see in the very top that black-gray material, black-brown sort of material, that's poured slag. So we had anywhere from 10 to 12 feet of poured slag on top of that white material, which is actually the tailings that were worked and reworked multiple times. And if you look to the left of the picture, you can see sort of a black lens. So that was a black clay. That's the old floodplain of Silverbow Creek. And all the contamination from that slag, the reworked tailings, were deposited in that black clay. It's very organic rich, and that had up to a few percentages for all the different contaminants that Catherine was just talking about. So that was all the material we used. This project is sort of unique in that things are so visually identifiable and structured that way. Phase one was very similar. We didn't have the poured slag, but the tailings and black clay were very distinct. So typically you don't have such nice visual cues. So I'm going to give you, I'm going to cut to the chase right here, respond to some questions that were in the letter, and then I'm going to give you just a little bit of background on each one of those questions. So one of the questions, and we're paraphrasing here, of course, what was the waste criteria for the parrot, and how does that compare to the BIPSU waste criteria? And these criteria are different. They look like they're the same, but they are different. The CD criteria were negotiated. It was negotiated between the state of Montana and EPA, and the criteria for the parrot project is what we set to protect groundwater, right? It was a groundwater project, allow vegetation, and this third component I don't think is well understood is to allow Butte-Silver Bow, so Butte-Silver Bow is the owner of the property, an unencumbered use of the site. So you could use the site for whatever. You want to put a park there, you want to build a hotel, you want to put a fountain, whatever, it allows you unencumbered use. So that was a critical consideration of ours. The second question that we pulled from Chairwoman Shea's letter was, how did we ensure that we removed all the waste that we said we would, and that the backfill was clean and met the criteria of the project? And this is really primarily achieved by using real-time contaminant concentration data from the project. So there's actually equipment nowadays that allows us to measure things in the field while we're performing construction. And I'll talk a little bit about this later. And the last component was, could the procedures and decision processes that we developed for the parrot be used on other sites? And the short answer to that is yeah. We believe that the process can be used at other sites. I will say that what we developed for the parrot was not something from holy cloth. It was a development of what is currently being used over in Anaconda for their cleanups and at other sites, and it was also developed in compliance with what EPA utilizes in their guidance. So we just took all these other projects, what they were doing and what they developed, and modified them to fit the parrot project itself. So it wasn't like something wholly new. It was just an evolution, and that's how these projects have been going. So the first question here is about comparing the waste criteria. So again, like Catherine went through, we got our 6 primary contaminants on the left, arsenic down through zinc, and then we've got the parrot project waste criteria that we formally developed in June of 2017. You can see that's 200 for arsenic and 20 for cadmium, thousands for copper, lead, and zinc, and 10 for mercury. And then now if you look at the BIPSU waste criteria, which came out, that was released in January of 2018, it's the same numbers, right? So it looks the same. But the real difference there, as Catherine pointed out, is that footnote that applies to the BIPSU waste criteria. If any 3 of the 6 contaminant criteria listed are exceeded, or any one is over 5,000, then it's considered waste, right? So what that means in summary is any one of those BIPSU waste criteria, any of 2 of them could be up to 5,000. our waste criteria, if any one of those were exceeded, any of one of those 6 were exceeded, we consider that waste. So it's a substantive difference, but if you just looked at the tables, they look similar. So talking about the fill criteria, again, same 6 contaminants. The first column there is the fill criteria for the PARROT project. And as you can see, it's the mirror image of the waste criteria. It's the same numbers. So it's either waste or it's protective fill. There's no gap there. If you look at what's existing in Table 2, which you guys have a copy of and Catherine sort of reviewed, those are the same numbers. And that's not coincidental. That is what the state negotiated, is the numbers that we're using on the PARROT that we utilized in Table 2 of the CD. Now what's being proposed here in the yellow is this new criteria. They want to use it as a mirror of the waste criteria with the footnotes. Now, I think this is where some people get confused. This is an example of an exceedance. It could be any 2 of those contaminants at 5,000. You could have arsenic and cadmium at 5,000. You could have, mercury or zinc at 5,000. Those numbers could move, but you could have up to 2 at 5,000 and still be allowed. It would still be allowed to be filled. And I think that's sort of this concern about making sure that we have a protectiveness analysis, that this material is utilized in a protective manner. So the second part of it, well, how do we do this waste fill identification, right? We have material on the site. You don't know what it is. You don't know whether it's waste or fill. It might look like waste, and it might be clean. It might look like it's clean, and it could be waste. So what we do initially is we took our site existing data, we constructed and built a model, and we used that model to estimate the volumes and the grades, removal elevations, all that kind of stuff for our planning and bidding purposes. So we developed a model, and that's what we bid on. And then during construction, even at a very well segregated site like that I showed you in that picture, where your waste is white or black, and you got slag and overburden, even from that, our construction lithology and the contaminant concentrations differs widely from what we originally modeled. So we have to have a material screening procedure for the PARROT that made sure that all the waste was removed and that we only use clean material for backfill. So how was this done? It was done by 3 major components. We had environmental sampling, and again, I'm going to give you a couple examples of that. Contaminant concentration for on-site material, excavation surfaces, and off-site material. But the key there under environmental sampling, it's all contaminant concentration driven, right? They're numbers from pieces of equipment that measured things. The second component, it's a little harder to understand, but I think when you see the picture, is this lithological, which is just a geologic word for soil layers. So visual determinations. And that again is this picture, right? So we can see where these contacts are. So when we're at the contacts, we're sampling a whole lot more. If something's clean above it and dirty below, making sure if there's whatever mixing, because we've got a big excavator, right? Whatever mixing, if it's contaminated, it still gets hauled off-site. So we did these. The third component was these geospatial survey. And so as you guys all know, there's classical survey methods, and now we use a lot of LiDAR to get things in 3 dimensions that provides us with volumes. So this might be a little confusing, but I thought it might be important for you guys to understand that for our on-site materials, whether it's waste or fill, we based our sampling on a grid pattern 100 feet by 50 feet, so about 5,000 square foot excavation area, and then we did an 8-point composite. So that equates to a frequency of about 1 sample per 400 cubic yards. The 8 subsamples within the 5,000 matches about 1 sample per 625 square feet. Now I know that's just a bunch of numbers, but that's driven by EPA guidance. This is what EPA requires of their projects. And it also, not coincidentally, but it's also what is done in Anaconda. So we were trying to match up what EPA requires and what's done in Anaconda. because we thought that it made mathematical sense and it provided for a protective project. The other components of our off-site, so we got off-site fill primarily from Montana Resources, again, a partner in the project, and that was about 160,000 cubic yards from them. We did one, because we were concerned that maybe it was impacted coming off an active mine area, one 8-point composite per 1,000 cubic yards, and then we also brought in about 100,000 cubic yards from the Eulens Ranch up Browns Gulch from an unimpacted area. And so we had a higher frequency there of one 8-point composite per 5,000 cubic yards. So the other thing to know about it, so we have this field piece of equipment, which I'm going to talk about really quickly, is even with this field piece of equipment, we send 10%, I think it is, maybe 8% of samples to the analytical lab to keep our equipment validated and calibrated. So it's not like we're just dependent on a single piece of information. So this is what we use nowadays. This is what we didn't have like in the 1990s for the cleanup projects. This stuff didn't exist. So this is a handheld X-ray fluorescence spectrometer. It's called an XRF for short. It allows us to accurately quantify contaminant concentrations in real time during construction. It allows us to remove just the targeted waste. So this is important. People don't understand. If you go by the model and the model says that something's contaminated and it's not, you still got to remove it as contaminated. So you're really just sort of wasting money. And there's also instances where it says it's clean and you can look at it and it might be blue-green and you know it's contaminated and needs to come out. So this allows us to do things in real time, shuttle and direct materials. And we think that because of this process that it saved not only the project time, but it saved us substantial money. So as an example up here, we moved in total 1.4 million cubic yards for the project, and that's waste and fill combined. And if you just did some rough math, and you could quibble over exactly what the assumptions are, but we had about 28,000 individual sample locations. So we had a sampling crew of engineers out there, like 3 people typically, working full-time while we're doing excavation, running these samples, but we still think it saved us substantial money. We moved as an example, we moved 1.4 million cubic yards for $16 million. So the whole project was 30, but 14 was for the new shops, right? So you cut the shops out. For moving dirt, we spent $16 million on 1.4 million cubic yards. And I think if you compare that to other similar cleanup projects, you'll see that that was a very low unit cost. So I know I went through this stuff fast, and there is a lot of details. In your packet, I have a wet tech memo that we developed a couple years ago with Josh Vincent and John Trudnowski, the two main leaders for the project, explaining all the sort of granular details, the engineering components of implementing this. And then the other component was a more easily consumed 2-page sort of fact sheet on it. So we included those both in there, so if you had more detailed questions than this, sort of quick overview, you'd have it. So the last thing, and before we get to questions, because I'm sure there are questions, we couldn't answer probably everything in Chairwoman Shea's letter, is this is a picture of the groundwater at the Parrot. So this isn't colorized, this isn't made up, and I have hundreds of pictures like this. So this isn't even the most dramatic picture. I've got lots of pictures. This is what the groundwater looked like at the Parrot. So that's copper and zinc and everything else you're looking at. If you look at the concentrations in this water, for most of the contaminants, you have higher concentrations than in the Berkeley pit. So this water was highly contaminated, and it was highly contaminated from those waste sources. And this is what we were trying to address with the project. Not only to help Butte have an aquifer sometime in its future, and it could be like long into its future, but also to protect the creeks from the groundwater discharge. We know that all the groundwater in this valley eventually discharges to a surface water body, the creeks. It ends up in Blacktail Creek or it ends up in Silverboat Creek. It's only going to evaporate or it's going to go out as a creek. And so we did this project to protect the creeks. So I know that was a lot, and now we're at questions.
Sorry, thank you, everybody, for coming and presenting your information. Commissioner Sorich.
Thank you, Commissioner Shea. Mr. Ford and the rest of the crew, thank you for being over here tonight. You probably spent a lot of time, I know, in Butte over the years. I've got a couple questions, actually. You know, my first one is, I'm just a little bit confused because you're saying possibly the model could be used. Well, okay, so Parrot Tailings was a restoration, correct? And Butte Priority Soils is remediation. So what's the difference? So how would they go together?
Well, part of it's a legal issue, so, I always hate following Catherine, because she's so good at explaining this. There's a legal distinction between what is remedy and what is restoration. Our money, of course, comes from recovery, from damage to the resources, right? So we did use restoration money. We look at this more as it was a waste removal project, done under restoration authorities. But I can tell you, like I managed and led the Silverbow Creek project in the 90s, and the design and the settlement for that project. And from a technical perspective, how we actually implement the project, it's the same things. We're trying to cost effectively and protectively remove waste. So from a practical perspective, there was no difference. From a legal perspective, there was a difference on our authorities, where the money came from, that kind of stuff.
One more question?
Follow up, Commissioner Sorich.
One more question for you, and this is just kind of an easy, hopefully an easy question. So I'm kind of curious, I didn't think the road behind Civic Center was going to be completed until maybe we figured out where the repository is going to be. So why was the road done before that was all finished?
We had a couple coordination meetings with BP, Atlantic Richfield, and EPA about possibly turning that road over, and there's railroad crossings in there, right, which are not easy to come by. After our second meeting, BP sent us a letter and said that they didn't need any of that infrastructure, and we could finish up the project.
Thank you. That explains a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ford. Commissioner Fisher.
Thank you for the presentation. Kind of a bright light in a dull moment when we deal with EPA and ARCO BP. These are a few questions I had from other people. Are there any sites outside of Butte-Silver Creek where the public is limited in obtaining information or use a filter like CTEC? Somebody in between, a go-between like CTEC? Do you know of anywhere else that does that?
Well, so I've worked in a number of other EPA regions around the country. So we're in Region 8 here, and so tag grant groups are typical with Superfund sites and other sites. Typically they're a source of interpreting technical information is what their typical mandate is. I don't know much. I've given a presentation or two to CTEC over the last 5 years. But aside from that, I don't really know, what their role's been like, say, with the commission here.
Thank you, Mr. Ford. Commissioner Fisher, follow up.
Thank you, Chairman Shea. I appreciate you being, I just got a few questions because I'm not really good at understanding all this stuff either. So just to follow up on that question, so I guess in your opinion or someone in your department's opinion, what do you feel CTEC's play is when they're being funded by ARCO BP? They got $150,000 from ARCO BP, and they're supposed to be our go-between.
Well, I think my understanding is, and I don't have firsthand knowledge, I think that their funding, typical tag grant groups funding comes from EPA, and I'm understanding that $150,000 came from EPA. But again, typically the mandate for tag grant groups is to interpret the technical information, like what I was going through here, interpret that for the public, because you can sort of get lost even in the technical stuff, whereas Catherine went through, I think she did a good job, but a very sort of legal component of it. But that's typically their role, is to help people understand things, and typically nothing more or less.
Thank you.
Commissioner Fisher.
I'm going to go through a few of these real quick, and if quick answers is fine. I'm not really an expert at this, so. Stormwater, I mean, have you worked anywhere where stormwater transport contaminates was an issue? And if so, were local taxpayers deemed responsible for those sites?
I developed a program in Reno, Nevada after I left Montana, and streamside tailings. It was solvents in the drinking water system down there in the wells. And most of those solvents were transported by the sewer system. But the municipalities there were not PRPs. They, it was dry cleaners. It was people who utilized the solvents. So that, I guess that would be something similar, but I don't know of another site like Butte, so I don't say that much.
Commissioner Fisher.
Thank you, Chairman Shea. Thank you, Mr. Ford. I appreciate these. These are just questions you get asked me, and I really don't know how to answer a lot of them. No. And they already explained a little bit about the distinction between imported fill and on-site fill. I think that was a great job done there. I'm just reading through a few of these questions. Did having public participation on the paratailings slow down the work at any time?
No, it never does. I mean, we have, under NRD regulations and how we've constructed the program, every step along the way when we're spending restoration money is part of a public, transparent process. And so I don't think it slows it down. Actually, I think it allows you to air out concerns or issues quicker and sooner you get to identify them. We went through a full process of trying to find a place for our waste too. And we built a good partnership with Montana Resources, who agreed to take the waste so we wouldn't have trucks over the road and stuff.
Yeah.
So I think those sorts of things, being an open, transparent process really sort of helps projects, has been my experience. I mean, sometimes it's painful, don't get me wrong, but it helps.
Commissioner Fisher.
Thank you, Chairman Shea. I'm winding down. Mr. Ford, so in other words, public participation creates transparency, and transparency is what drives the proper cleanup. Am I correct in stating that?
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Yeah, okay.
Commissioner
One more.
Fisher.
Thank you, Chairman Shea. So, did NRDP have public meetings when the CD parties claimed that confidential order applies to meetings still happening? I mean,
Could you repeat that?
Yeah. Did our NRDP have public meetings when the CD parties claimed the confidential order applies to meetings still happening? In other words,
We had we had public meetings, we had public tours, we, vet through things through our BNRC group. The CD, the confidentiality order for the CD didn't apply in any way to any of our activities. Our activities weren't associated with the CD.
Commissioner Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Ford. Thank you for you and your team being here. It's a breath of fresh air hearing something like this and a proper cleanup at the paratailings. I think a lot of us are just hoping that we can get the same thing done in the other three north side tailings, Buffalo Gulch and that kind of thing. So appreciate you being here. Thank you.
Mr. Ford, I'm going to switch gears just for a second. So I was able to read a letter, the NRDP comments about the Grove Gulch being at 95% design, and there were some concerns by NRDP with that. During public comment a couple weeks ago, I can't remember who was commenting, but somebody said that the NRDP was not allowed to participate in the design phase of that. And there was a gentleman that was sitting in one of the rows back here, very emphatically shaking his head that as if that were not true. Can you enlighten me?
Yeah, the NRD was not involved with the development of the Grove Gulch design.
Okay. Thank you. Are they required to be involved in that process, or should they have a seat at the table? Are they required to have a seat at the table for that kind of thing?
I can certainly say we're not required to. I think it, just as like public participation and transparency, I think it helps identify any potential issues earlier to have all the parties involved. You know, we have a limited role with the CD, being the trustee for representing the trustee, who's the governor of the state of Montana. In the development of the CD, the primary role is held by DEQ. So our role is limited, but we did, in reality, we just spent $30 million on the PARE project, and we want to make sure that the investment that the people of Montana made, that was public money, is protective. So we do feel like we have a role, but the primary role for remedial activities and remedial designs is DEQ's. And I think a number of DEQ folks are here even tonight.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Did you ever receive a response? I'm trying to remember, did you request a response from EPA in that letter that was sent? And if you did you receive a response?
I think we did request a response, and we haven't received a response yet.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Commissioner Fisher.
Thank you, Chairman Shea. Mr. Ford, could you explain that jar full of muck you got there?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, Pat Canine brought this in. So this is actually just this jar full of the different materials, the waste materials. So we have, actually in this example that wasn't in that picture, we had clean overburden. So we had about 300,000 or 400,000. And what's interesting about this material is it was the cap rock that they stripped off when they first started digging the pit. So that's where they didn't want to take it far, and so we used this material. It was clean, we tested it, thoroughly. So we have clean material, we have the tailings, we have this black clay that was really the highest concentration material, and then we have some, what we called regolith. It's basically the aquifer underneath that black clay. So we made some jars like this, so when we had tours, people could look at it. And this is one of the jars. I think Pat keeps it in his office, if you want to stop by.
Commissioner Fisher.
Thank you, Chairman. One more question. That jar, very interesting to see that. Now, we haven't done any real test wells and stuff, but like the diggings east, there's been a lot of smelters in that area too, which kind of people deny. They said no smelters, but there's smelters all over. Do you foresee something like that coming out of the diggings east too, or do you have any input on that?
Well, we do, historically, and the NRD program is the one that we didn't not only investigated the Parrot site, we investigated Diggings East, and we investigated Northside Tailings, we investigated Blacktail Creek and the Butte Reduction Works. So we investigated all those sites, and it's not coincidental that they're required to be cleaned up under the CD. I think the materials in Diggings East, that was an investigation done by the Bureau of Mines for us. There's a lot of demolition debris. It does not look like this. It looks like a dump on top. There's tailings on the bottom. There was a lot of cribbing in there. They were trying to keep the tailings out of the creeks and stuff. So there's tailings at the bottom, and then there's all sorts of other debris. So it doesn't look anything that consistent. It looks different.
Commissioner Fisher.
I'm sorry.
Mr. Canine, please.
If you don't mind, Pat Canine, 25 North Lake Drive. Commissioner Fisher, in 2013, we hired the Montana Bureau of Mines and Geology to do an investigation for us of the diggings east, the north side tailings, and the Blacktail Creek berm. We basically dug 50 test pits in those areas, and we finished that report up in, I think, February of 2014, and we came to this council in October of 2014 and presented that to you guys. I think you can probably find it on your website, and we do have that report in a PDF, and I could sure deliver it to you over an email if you like.
Thank you, Mr. Canine. I would appreciate if you sent that to the full council, just to the emails.
I can do that.
Thank you. Commissioner Fisher.
Thank you, Chairman Shea. One more question. The diggings east, we don't know what's really happening there. One of my fears, and a lot of my people that I visit with, their fear is that without a proper cleanup in the diggings east, that eventually will run into Silverboat Creek. The soil that's contaminated will somehow, flow through and flow into the creek that's not been cleaned from Texas Avenue to the Chamber Building. So if it does go into there, and
Diggings East is right behind what I call Baker Auto there. It's pretty close to the creek, and when we get rainstorms, that's gonna go right down Silver Creek and Blacktail if we don't get a proper cleanup. And I'm just wondering how deep we should be going rather than, you know, an 18-inch topsoil or something like that. And I know that's probably not in your wheelhouse, but one of my concerns, so any input would be appreciated, thank you.
Mr. Canine.
Chairman Shea, Commissioner Fisher. After we did our investigation there, we developed a draft conceptual restoration model or plan, and we were set to take out the Parrot, the Diggings East, the North Side, and the Blacktail Creek berm. And what we discovered when we did the Parrot project, and I'll just go ahead and even pass this around so you guys can look at it, but you know, the original tailings, and tailings are basically what comes out the end of the concentration process. So the first thing they do is they crush the rock, and it's mostly granite that the ore is encased in. So this looks like decomposed granite, and that's what tailings are. Back in the day, the process for concentrating was not very efficient, probably 80%, and typically tailings were 4% copper. And just to let you know what Montana Resources mines is typically 1/4%. And what we found when we did the Parrot is that most of the metals in the tailings were washed out because they ran acidic water across the tailings and then ran that water through a scrap metal pile, and the iron and the copper traded places. And that was typical all along Silverbow Creek. There were lots of mom and pop operations, and the Parrot actually had a commercial operation there that was ran by the Anaconda Company in World War II. So what we found is that the native clay that is below the tailings, and I'll just pass this around. But the grain size and the organic matter in the native clay holds on to those metals much more than the loose tailings. And we found up to 4% copper in the native clay. And what we found down in the Diggings East, that site got its name because when they started placer mining on Silverbow Creek, the discovery point was at Silverbow. Have you guys, anybody been to the monument out at Silverbow? Anybody? Anybody? You guys, Silverbow County got its name from that point. You got a field trip, you got homework to do. So as they moved upstream and they kept digging, they got all the way to the Diggings East, because that was as far east as they came. So that area was called the Diggings East. And then they went up the hill into the gulches looking for the placer ore. But there were no smelters between the Parrot and the Butte Reduction Works. There was a concentrator called the Fool's Concentrator. It would have been across the street from KOA. So east of Caw, south of George. And there's not much in there, but the Fool's Concentrator was a short-lived facility. But when we dug our test pits there, we found material that was very high in metals. And then the second facility that was in that area is actually under the site of the Columbus Plaza. And that was a concentrator called the Renger, R-E-N-G-E-R. And I couldn't find anything in the literature about it. So it was pretty old, not much known about it, but that site became the drive-in theater, and later it became a field where kids played football and baseball and old men played softball. And then the Columbus Plaza was built on top of it, and when we went to do our digging down there, we asked Columbus Plaza if we could dig there, and they were reluctant because they have a nice lawn and they didn't want it torn up. So we have not dug into any of the property that is owned by Columbus Plaza. So, but what our concern was there is very similar to the Parrot. The highest contaminated materials in the clay, and it is closer to the creek. So yes, that was a concern. And when we developed our plan, we were going to remove the waste material on top, and as Jim said, That material was not the overburden from the Berkeley. It was basically demolition debris from all over this town. And we figured there was about 180,000 yards. And to put that in perspective for you, the Finland Hotel is about 27,500 cubic yards. So there's about 6.5 Finlands of debris on top of the Diggings East tailings. And there's 2 areas where it's very thick, and that's around Caw and George. And then the other is on the very other end, around the end of Marcia Street and Wyoming Street, coming from off of Cobbin. And that area is privately owned. And to my knowledge, and I talked with the owner just last week, nobody's talked to him about purchasing his property. But when we looked at doing this project, one of the landowners in between was Kennelly family, and they said if we'd clean the property, they'd give it to us. And I said, we'll take it. And then my lawyer told me we couldn't own property. So I put them in touch with John Sesso, and John worked a deal with the county that the Kennelly family gave that property to Butte-Silver Bow. And I do think eventually there was some land swapped in that deal. But we wanted to see everything cleaned up, and we had a couple different versions of how that looked. But all that material on top, we wanted to take to a landfill, because that's where it should have went in the first place. And the tailings, we looked at 2 options. We wanted to slurry it or haul it. And the beauty of slurrying is that when you dewater, a slurry is typically 2 parts water, 1 part sand. And if we dewater that area, we could use that contaminated dewatering to make our slurry. And we had talked to Montana Resources about taking it, but it was only preliminary discussions, and that's all the farther we got.
Thank you, Mr. Canine. Good, okay. Commissioner Callahan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Shay. Thank you, Jim, for coming and bringing your staff. I know people's time's important to them, and you guys come to Butte quite often. First of all, I'd like to thank all you guys and Mr. Canine. I mean, he's as dedicated and a hard worker guy as you can find, and we appreciate all your work. I heard tonight that it was taxpayers' money that paid for the Diggins East, or the Parrot tailings.
Yeah, I think I misspoke a little bit. It was recovered money, so actually it didn't come from anybody's taxes. It was money that the state recovered for the damages that were done in the basin. So again, I guess a little too free with the words. It didn't come from taxes, just came from recovered money for injuries to state resources.
Recovered from ARCO, right?
Yes.
And I find it kind of interesting that the shops came in at 14,000 and the settlement money was 30,000, and in the end it all balanced out at 30,000. How did you just pull that out?
I guess I don't quite understand the question. I mean, we budgeted for the project. We had estimates. I mean, Butte-Silver Bow actually led the construction of the shops and did a really good job at keeping it on budget and on schedule, because our schedule was dependent on being able to demo the old shops, right, in the second phase. And we did, the project as a whole has come well in under budget. I mean, I know you don't hear that much in the public sector, and I've been in the public sector most of my career, of coming in under budget, but we came substantially in under budget. And that's, you know, I'm not saying that from NRD's perspective, like patting ourselves on the back. It really has more to do with the partnerships and the work of the community, whether it's Butte-Silver Bow or Montana Resources or others. I mean, that's what made this project so successful, is the partnerships with Montana Resources and Butte-Silver Bow. So I'm not sure if that answered your question, but.
Right. I just found it kind of interesting that the settlement was 30 million and
Well, actually, we never settled for the removal of the Parrot. We utilized funds from various other accounts, whether it was we settled for Butte groundwater, injury to groundwater. We had settlements in the Clark Fork Basin. There was money from that. There was money that was left over from the streamside tailings cleanup from that settlement. So we cobbled together all these different settlements to meet our budget. So it wasn't coincidental. It was sort of
A lot of
meeting
work.
meeting our budgets, yeah.
Okay, okay. One more.
Follow-up, Commissioner Callahan.
Go ahead, Pat.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Callahan, a little more detail. So the Butte Area 1 natural resource damage settlement was for the alluvial aquifer, and that's the shallow aquifer, and the injuries to Silverbow and Blacktail Creeks that were caused by releases of hazardous material by Atlantic Richfield and their predecessors. And that settlement was in 2008, and it was $28.1 million. And over time, that money was invested, and it grew to about $32 million. And the governor appointed a council, or created a council. 6 members were appointed by Butte-Silver Bow and 3 by the governor. And they're the Butte Natural Resource Damage Restoration Council. We call them the BNRC. And we've had to date 98 meetings about how to spend that money. And we came up with a plan, a restoration plan for Butte Area 1, and that was signed in 2012 by Governor Schweitzer. And since then it's been modified, and by far the most, the best bang for our buck was the removal of the parrot tailings. And we came up with 6 categories that had funds, and one was the removal of wastes, and then another was for drinking water infrastructure, and then it was the stream restoration, got $4 million, and then there was $1 million set aside for recreation, which hasn't been touched. There was $0 spent towards stormwater because we thought that is normal government function, and restoration money should not be spent for that. But $10 million from the parrot came from Butte Area 1, and the rest of it, as Jim said, came from interest on the bedrock aquifer settlement with Atlantic Richfield, and that was the entire Upper Clark Fork River Basin settlement was $98 million, and about 36% of that was for the bedrock aquifer, which is what the water you see in the Berkeley pit, and injuries to the aquifers in Anaconda. So $10 million went to Anaconda, $30 million to Butte, and that $30 million gained interest, and that interest was put towards the parrot. But $10 million from Butte Area 1 went towards the Basin Creek water treatment plant, $10 million towards the parrot, $6 million was to be spent on putting native and woody vegetation on the Butte Hill, and $4 million to stream restoration, and $1 million for recreation, and that hasn't been touched yet. But all those funds where we borrowed from other projects, like Jim said, have to be repaid once we are finished. So in the consent decree, there was a settlement with ARCO for $20.5 million, and with that, the Montana Department of Environmental Quality is supposed to take care of the Blacktail Creek berm and the confluence area, and then any funds that are left over come back to restoration, and they go back to the places which they came from to repay those funds where we borrowed for the parrot.
Follow-up, Commissioner Callahan.
Thank you, Chairman. I got a question. Do you guys believe that the Restore Our Creek proposed creek channel extending from Texas Avenue to Blacktail Creek qualifies as stream restoration?
That's a difficult question, Dan. Restoration is to restore something to its pre-injured condition. And if we were to truly restore Silverbow Creek, we would have to restore it from the headwaters, which is above the Berkeley pit. So that's what a true restoration would be. Are there different variations of that? Yes, if you can make a stream look and function as the uninjured stream does, and if that is their goal, then yes, that would be a valid restoration project. What I understand of Restore Our Creek is what they're trying to do is very admirable, and they've got a heavy lift, and at this point, we have not dedicated any Butte Area 1 restoration funds towards that endeavor.
Follow up.
Is there a possibility you will be doing that, or? I think the governor already promised $1 million, didn't he? I don't know if that's out of your pot, or?
Dan, that is, excuse me,
Go ahead, Mr. Knight.
Chairperson Shea, Commissioner Callahan. Yes, I think it's, and Doug probably knows this better than I do. I was actually working for the county when this amendment to the Butte Area 1 plan was done. So I will defer this question to Doug Martin.
Go ahead, Mr. Martin.
Chairwoman Shea, Councilman Callahan. At this point, the Natural Resource Damage Program hasn't weighed in on exactly what it, for the Restore Our Creek, but it is not something that we are looking at because of what Pat has said. The Restore Our Creek, the channel is not a restoration action from what we understand of it at this point. The $1 million that was allocated is coming from the Blacktail Creek settlement, so it is not restoration dollars.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Sorich.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a comment and a question. You know, there was a lot of work done to clean up the Parrot tailings. There's a lot of work, but there's still a lot of contamination downstream. I guess I kind of struggle a little bit with that contamination stopped at Parrot tailings and it didn't go close to the Civic Center, you know, or it didn't go towards Harrison Avenue, you know, or it didn't go beyond that. And I know there's been a lot of wells and there's been a lot of testing, a lot of work to ensure that, you know, that you got it all. But what kind of safeties or what kind of monitoring is being put in place, or what kind of place to ensure that this was your cleanup was a success, and there's nothing else that might have been missed that won't contaminate downstream?
Mr. Ford.
Thank you.
It's on. Oh, now it's off.
There it goes. Okay. That's an excellent question. So part of what we're required to do statutorily is look at the effectiveness of our restoration activities, or in this case, this waste removal activity. So we have developed and it's a whole nother presentation, a very extensive groundwater monitoring program. And it's based on lines of wells perpendicular to groundwater flow in its simplest sense, all the way down to the creeks. We started monitoring more than a year before we started the project, and we're monitoring on a quarterly basis currently. We can see, with our existing data, we can see the effects already of the removal of the action and reduced concentrations. We can see the effects of other actions, you know, being taken by BP, like the subdrain. So I think we have a good monitoring program in place to look at groundwater flow, and look at the impacts of this removal. We also have a good monitoring in place to look at the impacts from other remedial activities. Currently, we're going to kick off discussions with BP about melding our two monitoring programs into just one. Right now we have two separate things, and we're doing a lot of the similar stuff, and it's costing us a lot of money, more than $500,000 a year to do that. We'd like to save that money and spend it on other projects in Butte. And so we're going to work with BP to bring those together so there's just one monitoring activity. We can analyze the data differently, we could come to different conclusions, but at least we're agreeing on what needs to be collected. But it includes almost 100 wells all the way down. So we have a good idea not only of the existing conditions of the Parrot, and we think that about 90% of the contamination that's in the alluvial aquifer came from the Parrot, and the residual of that is what you find at Diggings East, or, you know, near the visitor center, or from other sources. So we're pretty confident in looking at this. And I will say that this is sort of unique for a restoration activity to have such a comprehensive monitoring program.
Thank you. That's a good answer for me.
Thank you, Commissioner Sorich. Any other commissioners have any questions? I have a question. related to leaving the waste in place, whatever. There's 3 different terms that have been thrown around for what this is called, but can you see any reason, I mean, what would be the reason to leave certain waste there? And what would be the benefit to removing it and having all of the fill be clean?
Well, I can speak, all 4 of us, many of us could speak to this from different perspectives. From my perspective, and my experience, the criteria that we had for the Parrot was, as I said in the presentation, a big driver of that was, of course, we want to protect groundwater, right? That's why we were doing the project. You see the picture of the blue-green water. We want to make sure you can grow vegetation, right? That the concentrations, you want to make sure that it's protective of human health, right? But a big driver for us is we wanted to leave in the center of town a plot of land that could be used for whatever is decided by the community going forward. You know, we're not involved with how it's Butte-Silver Bow's property, and we wanted to make sure that what we left behind could allow any sort of use for it. Again, we were in control of this. What's in the CD was a negotiated component. I can tell you that waste criteria is the waste criteria we developed for the Streamside Tailings Project in 1995. So in 1995, we didn't have any XRFs. We didn't even have cleanup criteria. There was no EPA guidance. We used spray bottles and it turned soils colors. That's all we knew about concentrations back then. So things have evolved a long way, but we agreed, the state agreed to utilize that waste criteria. And as Catherine and Doug both said, we support the CD. You know, why somebody would want to leave something at a higher concentration, I don't know, you'd have to ask them. Our concerns are that whatever EPA proposes to do, that it's protected. They need to show protection, right? We didn't spend $30 million on the Parrot to allow like more contamination to groundwater, for instance, right? That would just make no sense. And so that's all we're really requesting is an analysis of protection to show whatever it is that they're proposing. I can say it here in a simple sense that everybody, and this might be everybody agrees that this category of fill has risks with it. And EPA says, well, we can address that risks by an 18-inch cap, or putting it under a parking lot, or putting it where groundwater is being captured, right? So that's an acknowledgement that this material by itself, you couldn't put in a playground. It would be a risk. And so what we want to do is make sure that we're in agreement on what those controls are. You know, parking lots or underneath liners or in safe places. Because we all agree that this stuff could be a risk to water quality or human health or vegetation.
Thank you for that answer. And then one other question, just out of curiosity, because there's been discussions around possibly using the pit as a repository. Was that considered for your project at the Parrot? And I'm just curious.
Yes. Yeah, we looked at during, we were developing the design, and that was in parallel with the development of the negotiation of the consent decree. So we did look at disposal in the pit. At the time, it was determined that there was unacceptable risks for some of the other parties in the CD. So we moved on and found another location on MR's active mine property to actually locate the waste. So it's up on MR. It's in the capture zone, in the groundwater capture zone of the pit. So even if anything leaks up there, it just discharges to the pit, right? It doesn't discharge the alluvial aquifer. So we think we found a very safe location up there, but we did look at, disposal in the pit.
So you just said that there was some unacceptable risk to parties. Are you at liberty to say what those risks were?
Probably not, and I don't really, I think it had something to do with what's already been mentioned by, I think Josh mentioned it last week, Josh Bryson. They want to look at some of the geochemistry and stuff, right, to make sure that if you have organics, like that black clay we have, if you add organics to that sort of chemistry, you could maybe fundamentally change the pit chemistry. And so I think they just need to look into that. And we didn't really take it further than a superficial discussion and look. When we found another location and MR was working with us, you know, we thought that that was more than adequate. Again, our real desire was not to drive, you know, hundreds of thousands of trucks through town of waste. That was what we were looking to avoid at all costs.
All right, thank you very much. Commissioner Callahan.
Thank you, Chairwoman Shea. I guess my question is, after John asked his question about the test wells and stuff, maybe I'm wrong, maybe one of you can correct me, but when you were doing the Parrot and you had to take some of your test wells out, I guess I was in the impression that they would put them back in so they could still sample. I haven't noticed if we put any back in or not.
Mr. Fort.
Yes, thank you. Currently, yeah, we did remove wells. There were wells that were like right in the excavation area and stuff. I think our agreement with EPA is EPA and BP will put back what wells they think are necessary, and we'll replace what well, if there's a difference of opinion, we'll install some additional wells. You know, as representing the public, we sort of like monitoring wells. They give us information. It's not always good for a PRP to have monitoring wells. So if there's a difference of opinion, we'll install more wells. But again, we don't know what that end land use is, so we don't want to install wells like right in the middle of a parcel, say that if there's a hotel there or a park. So we're trying to figure out areas on the perimeter. We just haven't gotten that far to install the wells. But we do have existing wells, upgrading of the site. We have wells on MR's property. You know, that's where the water's flowing down from. So we do have existing wells around on the perimeter. We just haven't reinstalled some of those wells that were existing. Like I think you probably had seen, Pat always liked to pump that well that pumped out blue water like this into a white bucket. Unfortunately, that blue water just wasn't just around that well pair, that it was everywhere. But I think those sorts of wells we will be replacing. It's a fairly low-cost, easy thing to do, the monitoring wells.
Okay.
Follow-up.
Just one follow-up. I just, you know, they just paved the whole parking lot, and that was all paid for. Most of it was paid for through you guys. And the north parking lot, they did a blue grade, so it's ready for pavement. I was just making sure you don't have to put strategically placed wells, because it could be right in the middle of the parking lot where the road gets traffic in or out, or...
Yeah, exactly. So there are areas, we've seen the plan for the parking lot. I know it's quite expensive, so it might be a while before it's implemented for the islands and the lighting and all that. But if we did need to install wells, we would install them in those like islands where you have the lights set and stuff, so they would be out of the way. I mean, there are flush grade monitoring wells that you can do in parking areas, but they're always they end up always breaking and getting destroyed and storm water running down them. So we want to avoid that. So part of our actions is going to wait and see, you know, how you guys roll out with the end land use for that, and then plan wells dependent on that in part.
Follow-up, go ahead.
I'll make this the last one. And I think you answered this at the meeting you had for the ribbon cutting, but I can't remember exactly what the answer was. The drain fields you have under the north side, you haven't pumped that since you've done the north side, or since you started the south side? Are you planning on pumping that again, or is that just...
Yes, Commissioner, that's a good question. We haven't pumped groundwater again. We pumped about 38 million gallons of this heavily contaminated groundwater, and lucky for us, MR was willing to take that, so we didn't have to treat that water, because that would have been millions of dollars. They used it in their process lines. We haven't pumped that for about a year. That's something that we think should be done. The residual contamination of this groundwater, not to let it flow downhill, capture it at the Parrot. We've had some meetings with BP to see about implementing a project to capture this water, if they would be willing to do that or work with us to do it. Again, we see this contaminated groundwater as BP's responsibility. It's not the state of Montana's responsibility, but we think there's an opportunity to work together to capture that. This is the water that's plugging the subdrain. So if we can keep it out of the subdrain, then it won't be, it's also water that ends up in the BTL, needs to be treated. So we think there's an opportunity. They're willing to engage in those discussions. We think we've done some modeling and some basic engineering. It looks like about 4 production wells, less than 200 gallons a minute. We could capture all the water within the Parrot area. And MR has told us they'd be willing to take that water. So we wouldn't, again, have to pay to treat it. And we could do that for, you know, less than $1 million, $1.5 million. So we think it's a low-cost, you know, high-value activity. But it's not part of the Parrot project. That wasn't budgeted and it wasn't scheduled. So it's something we want to work with BP on in sort of a cooperative manner. Now, again, it's not something they're required to do under the consent decree. This would be outside the consent decree. But we think there's a number of benefits for them with their existing projects.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ford. Are there any other questions for commissioners? Okay. Well, thank you to all the NRDP staff. We appreciate your time. We appreciate you taking the time to drive down here and present to us in person. And I hope you guys have a safe trip home and a good evening. With that, before we get into the meat of the agenda, I would like a 5-minute recess. So we'll recess for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Pat. No, I'm good. I'm good. Thank you. Well, I got some in my yard anyway. I just avoided asking them. You can ask whatever you want. Yeah. Anything. They'll miss a long meeting. It's a long meeting tonight. They're always long. 4:30 comes our meeting. They're all long meetings. It's just becoming. Nice sweater. Thanks. Wine's good. I picked up another one tonight. All right. Pictures tomorrow. Family pictures. Can't wait. Excited. Support locally. Hey, what do you think? So the Hollywood strike is over. What's that? The Hollywood strike is over. What's that all about? I don't know, the writers and actors. Oh, that one. Oh. The strike is over. Oh. Yellowstone coming back? It should.
We've got about 1 minute before we reconvene.
We just want to get you going. White ones. They can go from there to big ones.
He's in there. Okay. I'll give him 10 more seconds. CJ. Okay. All right. Okay. No. We'll reconvene the meeting now, since the gang's all here. Moving on to Section 2, Communications. Item number 1, Communication number 2023-436. Jim Fisher, Commissioner District 6, requesting a resolution to be considered for expressing the policy of Butte-Silver Bow regarding consent decree commitments, communications, and public transparency. Commissioner Fisher.
Thank you, Chairman Shea. At this time, I would like to make a motion to put this in the suspense file for 6 months.
There's a motion. County Attorney.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Fisher, you already acted on this communication on October 11th. You made a motion to have the resolution you proposed be put into a resolution form, and that motion passed. And on October 18th, when the council met and approved the Committee of the Whole report, you basically adopted that motion, so I don't think you could make another motion when you've already taken action on this communication.
County Attorney Joyce, what is the appropriate disposition?
I think at this time you'd have to place this communication on file, since the only reason that it's still on the agenda is because 2 weeks ago it was held in abeyance pending your action on the formal resolution. And so therefore, you'd have to place it on file at this time.
Thank you. Commissioner Fisher.
Thank you, Chairman Shea. At this time, I make a motion that we note and place on file communication 2023-436.
There is a motion and a second on the floor to note and place on file communication number 2023-436. Is there anything on the question? Commissioners, please vote. Oops, sorry. Would anyone like to change their vote? Clerk, please record the vote.
9 yay, 1 nay.
Motion passes. Item number 2, communication number 2023-508. Kristen Rosa, Economic Development Coordinator, requesting Council of Commissioners approval to hold a public hearing on November 1, 2023 to hear public comment on the proposed amendments to the South Butte Targeted Economic Development District Plan. This public hearing was held last weekend. Commissioner Anderson.
We had this communication last week, and so at this time, last week, I'm sorry, my brain is still fried from last week. Being as we did have this, so I'll make a motion to note this and place it on file.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to place communication number 2023-508 on file. Is there anything on the question? Will everyone please vote? Clerk, please record the vote.
10 yea, 0 nay.
10 yea, 0 nay, motion carries. Item number 3, communication number 2023-509. Kristen Rosa, Economic Development Coordinator, requesting Council of Commissioners approval to hold a public hearing on November 1st, 2023 to hear public comment on the proposed amendments to the Butte Uptown Renewal District Plan. This public hearing was also held last week. So Commissioner Thatcher.
At this time, I'd like to place communication number 2023-509 on file.
Second.
Motion and a second on the floor to place communication number 2023-509 on file. Is there anything on the question? Will everyone please vote? Would anyone like to change their vote? Clerk, please record the vote.
10 yea, 0 nay.
10 yea, 0 nay, motion carries. Item number 4, communication number 2023-510. Kristen Rosa, Economic Development Coordinator, requesting Council of Commissioners approval to hold a public hearing on November 1st, 2023 to hear public comment on the proposed creation of the Montana Connections Targeted Economic Development District. We had this public hearing last week as well. Commissioner Thatcher.
This time, I'd like to place communication number 2023-510 on file.
Second.
Motion and a second to place communication number 2023-510 on file. Is there anything on the question? Will everyone please vote? Clerk, please record the vote.
10 yea, 0 nay.
10 yea, 0 nay, motion passes. Item number 5, Morgan Machione, Program Director of the Clark Chateau, requesting Council of Commissioners approval to hold a public hearing on November 1st, 2023 regarding amending the fiscal year 2024 budget to allow for unanticipated revenue to the Clark Chateau budget. This public hearing was also held last week. Commissioner Thatcher.
At this time, I'd like to place communication number 2023-512 on file.
Second.
Motion and a second to place communication number 2023-512 on file. Is there anything on the question? Will everyone please vote? Would anyone like to change their vote? Clerk, please record the vote.
10 yea, 0 nay.
10 yea, 0 nay, motion passes. Item number 6, communication number 2023-529. Josh Bryson, Atlantic Richfield Company Liability Manager, requesting time at the November 1, 2023 Council of Commissioners regular meeting to present an update on Butte Priority Soils Operable Unit remedial design and remedial action progress. This presentation was held last week. Commissioner Thatcher.
At this time, I'd like to place communication number 2023-529 on file.
Second.
Motion and a second to place communication number 2023-529 on file. Is there anything on the question? Will everyone please vote? Would anyone like to change their vote? Clerk, please record the vote.
10 yea, 0 nay.
10 yea, 0 nay, motion passes. Item number 7, communication number 2023-536. Karen Malachny, Butte-Silver Bow Health Officer, requesting Council of Commissioners concurrence to hold a public hearing for unanticipated revenue for the Health Department on November 15th, 2023, for the purpose of amending the fiscal year 2023-2024 budget to allow for increased expenditures of unanticipated revenue resulting from receiving a contract with the National Alliance of State and Territorial AIDS Directors, NASTAD. We will hold this one until the 15th. Item number 8, communication number 2023-539. Jim Keenan, Water Treatment Chief Operator, requesting Council of Commissioners concurrence to schedule a bid opening for December 6, 2023 for the landscape restoration of the Basin Creek Watershed Fuel Reduction Phase 3. We will hold this one until that time as well. Item number 9, communication number 2023-548. Jim Fisher, Commissioner District 6, requesting Butte-Silver Bow Community Development Director Karen Burns and/or Chief Executive J.P. Gallagher present to Butte-Silver Bow Council on November 8th, 2023, an update on the courthouse restroom project. This presentation was held tonight. Commissioner Thatcher.
This time, I'd like to place communication number 2023-548 on file.
Second.
Motion and a second to place communication number 2023-548 on file. Is there anything on the question? Will everyone please vote? Thank you. Would anyone like to change their vote? Clerk, please record the vote.
10 yea, 0 nay.
10 yea, 0 nay, motion passes. Item number 10, communication number 2023-549. Michelle Shea, Commissioner District 2, requesting time at the November 8th, 2023 Committee of the Whole meeting for the NRDP to make a presentation to the Butte-Silver Bow Council of Commissioners. This presentation was held earlier. Commissioner Thatcher.
This time, I'd like to place communication number 2023-549 on file.
Second.
Motion and a second to place communication number 2023-549 on file. Is there anything on the question? Will everyone please vote? Would anyone like to change their vote? Clerk, please record the vote.
10 yea, 0 nay.
10 yea, 0 nay, motion passes. And now we're at the public comment on any public matter not on tonight's agenda. If there are any members of the public who would like to speak on any item not on the agenda, please come to the microphone. Seeing none, I believe Commissioner Mankins would like to say something.
Thank you, Chairwoman Shea. I was just curious with the schedule through the November. I know that the 5th week on the 29th, that is our day off, but I was just curious to know, seeing that the 22nd does land on a travel day for a lot of us and a lot of our families for the Thanksgiving Day, that if we could move that day to be taken off the 22nd and report the 29th. I don't know if that is something that can be done, or
I can talk to Chairman Frederickson about that, and I believe it's doable if everybody's agreeable. Is that correct, County Attorney Joyce? Yeah, I thought so. I think that's a great idea. Thank you for bringing it up. Okay. Commissioner
Thank you, Madam
Sorge.
Chair. I just wanted to say, yeah, I think it's a good idea too. I wouldn't have a problem.
Yeah, okay. I'll report back to Sean and see what his pleasure is. Okay. All right. With that, I'll take a motion to adjourn. All right. All those in favor, signal by saying aye.